As the first full year of the Revolutionary War drew to a close, it was clear there was a long road ahead before anything would be resolved between the American colonies and Great Britain. Obviously, British authority in the colonies was a thing of the past, and the British were now enemies within what used to be their own colonial possession. The citizens of what would become America were now looking toward the future, how to win the war, and how to move forward if they did. It was not 100% clear if independence was the path that all Americans wanted to take, but there needed to be governments within the colonies to keep them from collapsing during the war. In the spring of 1776, each colony created a provincial congress made up of the assembly members from the previous colonial government. From that point, a new government was formed to keep the colony on its feet. Still, there was an eye on the major issue at hand, as the Continental Congress called for a vote from each colony to decide on the issue of independence. When that vote illustrated that all but two colonies, Delaware and New York, were interested in declaring independence from the motherland, the choice was made to prepare for the next step, even if it would never be taken. As they waited for a unanimous decision to declare independence, they chose to draft a document to assert their freedom from Great Britain, especially from the Crown. Writers included Thomas Jefferson, representing Virginia, John Adams, representing Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin, representing Pennsylvania, Roger Sherman, representing Connecticut, and Robert Livingston, representing New York, an interesting choice given New York's lack of commitment on the document's topic. All of these men were elites politically and economically, and their goal would be to construct a declaration that all colonists could stand behind and that represented everyone's goals. The declaration was meant to be simple and to not break any major new ground politically, but that was impossible. The resulting document, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America, or as we know it, the Declaration of Independence, became a manifesto for liberty and a beacon of hope for a new nation. It eloquently articulated the colony's grievances against the British Crown and asserted an unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for what many thought was everyone. The Declaration of Independence didn't just create a nation, it put into the minds of Americans their right to be a part of the new nation and participate in its shaping. The document granted them rights as Americans that they should have had as British citizens and members of the larger British Empire. The issue of consent of the people had played a large role in the lead up to the revolution, and it was now playing a large role in shaping the newly created United States. Thomas Jefferson, the principal drafter, made sure he infused the text with Enlightenment ideals that emphasized reason, equality, and especially individual rights. It was important to him and the other men who worked collaboratively that the document resonated with the diverse perspectives of the colonies while playing on their common experience with the Crown and Parliament and unifying them as men and citizens. They also understood that this declaration would define their struggle and hopefully inspire future generations. With that said, it was also a document that was supposed to declare to the Crown and Parliament the independence of the colonies, and a significant emphasis was put on making it clear to the British government that they had had enough and they were never coming back. The declaration asserted that the king and his minions in Parliament, particularly Lord North, had become oppressive despots who felt they had absolute authority over the colonies. This behavior, which violated the rights outlined in the English Constitution, meant the colonists had the responsibility and right to check that power by detaching from the despotic government and creating their own. They believed they should be free from pledging their allegiance, lives, and livelihoods to the crown and develop a new nation and therefore government independent from their motherland. In outlining these rights, they illustrated how important they found the laws of the motherland and the rights that they deserved as British subjects. Since those rights had been forsaken, it was really their duty to free themselves and their fellow colonists. Interestingly, the Declaration placed the blame largely on the king, with all charges being levied against the king, charges that included the unlawfulness of the major acts imposed against the colonies since the 1760s and the disregard for the governmental system that each colony had created for themselves. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress formally adopted the Declaration of Independence after a final vote for independence by all colonies 2 days prior. The news spread like wildfire throughout the new United States of America, igniting both celebration and resolve among the colonists. They tore down and destroyed the symbols of the monarchy that they had so willfully displayed before, and certainly those that were forced upon them in the last decade or so. For the first time, the notion of an independent United States of America was officially proclaimed. The journey ahead was fraught with challenges, battles, and sacrifices, but the Declaration served as a guiding light. It unified the colonies under a common cause of independence and provided a powerful narrative for freedom and self determination that would carry many through the tough days ahead in the Revolutionary War. As the war raged on, the words of the Declaration echoed in the hearts of soldiers and civilians alike, fueling their desire for independence. There still was a great challenge ahead for the Americans: the ability to push Great Britain off their portion of the North American continent and fully obtain independence. It was clear to them that they needed help from an international source, given the immense resources of the motherland. The obvious choice for this was France, not just because of its own resources and the tensions between France and Great Britain, tensions that had much greater implications than what was going on in North America, but also because of the French tradition of accepting many of the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. A few months after their declaration, the Americans sent Benjamin Franklin to France to ask for and negotiate assistance in the Revolutionary War. The desire to help the Americans was already there for the French. To them, they certainly were interested in the experiment of independence, human rights, and eventually democracy that the former colonists had embarked on. But to be sure, France was definitely interested in harming Great Britain and getting the upper hand in their relationship, a relationship that had slipped quite a bit in the favor of the British in recent years. But initially, help from the French was not all it was cracked up to be. The initial members of the French military sent to help fight in the war ended up wanting to be seen as superiors rather than military assistants. They demanded pay for their efforts as well. All of this was not typical when nations were seen as peers in the international system. Not only did George Washington and his officers in the Continental Army take offense to the Frenchmen's demands, but American political elites were offended by them too. However, there were others who wanted to help, pure and simple, with no strings attached. Playwright Pierre Beaumarchais sent guns and gunpowder to the new nation, while the Marquis de Lafayette came to America and asked to volunteer in Washington's army. It was also Lafayette who convinced King Louis XVI to recognize the independence of the United States after several major military wins. Once the French government, military, and its monarch were behind the efforts of the Americans to free themselves from the oppression of Great Britain, the trajectory of the war changed. The French king pledged to fight with the Americans until their independence was recognized by Great Britain. The news was a great boon to the new nation. Certainly, the Americans had been holding their own with some major efforts to defeat the British, but it was clear even those victories would create a stalemate at best. The major effect that France's entrance into the war had was actually on the sea. Although the Americans had captured over 1,000 ships on the high sea via privateers that they had hired, the French threat was much greater. The French could attack both the British homeland and its colonies, all by sea. Almost immediately after learning of the French entrance into the war, British warships started to sail away from the coast of the United States. Some remained, but it was clear Great Britain was on guard and preparing to defend its holdings that were not embroiled in rebellion. Great Britain's concerns over the French entrance into the Revolutionary War coupled with the Continental Army's ability to hold its own, led to a major change to its policies toward the American colonies. The Declaratory Acts of 1776, which proclaimed the continued authority of Parliament to govern the colonies, was repealed in 1778, and with it the ability of Great Britain to tax the colonies. Parliament then pledged that it would not enact any additional laws to replace these acts, and that all revenues made in America would be allowed to stay in the colonies and be spent on their administration. This was a signal that it was time now for the motherland to put more focus on its real enemies, the French. All of these concessions were too late for the Americans. They had declared independence and created a nation. To them, there was no turning back. Although the war for the colonies was still on for Great Britain, the British military proceeded to leave its more recent headquarters of Philadelphia and send most of its men to Florida and its Caribbean holdings. The effect of French involvement was therefore immense. By April of 1779, the Empire of Spain had entered the fray too, declaring war on Britain and threatening, like the French, to invade England. France played a pivotal role in tipping the scales of the war in the favor of the American colonies. One of the most significant military advantages held by France was its powerful navy, which was instrumental in the final stages of the conflict. The dispatch of 28 ships and 3,000 French and Haitian troops to the Virginia coast illustrates this advantage. These forces, under the command of the Comte de Rochambeau and Admiral de Grasse, aimed to support the American forces in their decisive confrontation against British General Cornwallis at Yorktown. The arrival of the French fleet at the Chesapeake Bay was a game changer. It effectively blocked Cornwallis's escape by sea and cut off any reinforcements from Britain. This naval blockade, combined with the coordinated ground attack by the Allied forces, placed Cornwallis in an untenable position. Meanwhile, the Continental Army, led by General George Washington, marched from New York to Virginia, joining forces with the Southern contingent under General Nathanael Greene and the reinforcements brought by General Horatio Gates. This convergence of American and French forces created a situation that even Cornwallis could not withstand. With 16,000 French and American soldiers and only 7,000 British troops, it was clear what was going to happen. The siege at Yorktown, which ensued from this assembly of Allied forces, marked the end of the Revolutionary War. The combined Franco American siege laid pressure on the British defenses, leading to Cornwallis's surrender on October 19, 1781. This decisive victory not only demonstrated the effective collaboration between the American and French forces, but also underscored the critical impact of foreign intervention in the American quest for independence. The surrender at Yorktown effectively ended major hostilities and paved the way for the eventual signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783 and international recognition of American independence. The American victory in the Revolutionary War gave them the freedom they fought so hard to attain. The citizens of the old 13 colonies, now the United States of America, had a major task ahead of them to sustain themselves as a new nation, independent of any other. The fledgling nation would struggle with many things in those first years, trying to preserve the rights of its citizens and deciding who was actually to receive those rights, as well as how to maintain the new government they had created via the Articles of Confederation. The Articles, created in July 1776 and then debated and ironed out for over a year, established a highly decentralized government for the United States. It took a while for all of the states to ratify it, especially with the Revolutionary War in full effect, but the ratification finally occurred in the early spring of 1781. However, the main reason for the drawn out period before its adoption illustrates how contentious the idea of having an American government truly was for the newly independent Americans. From elites to laborers, there was considerable concern over losing individual liberties and rights. and that concern has truly never gone away. To placate those concerned about individual liberties and the freedom of Americans to live the lives they wanted to live, the first governor of the government of the United States was quite weak. The Articles of Confederation created just that, a loose confederation of states that had very little oversight from the new government. The Articles established the main government and the rules by which it had to abide. The states would remain sovereign, and they would preside over all administrative functions for themselves, except for those specifically given to the federal Congress. That Congress was very limited in its delineated powers, which mainly were the ability to start war and establish the peace, to negotiate treaties with other governments throughout the world, and to resolve disputes between the states. The limitations of this new government were numerous, and they would show themselves throughout the first years of the nation, so much so that in 6 short years from the ratification, the Articles of Confederation were on its way to being obsolete. On the suggestion of James Madison, a new centralized federal government was thought of as the best solution, but one that had a firm grasp on the major influence and power of the American populace. Created in the fall of 1787, it took 8 months for the states to ratify the document and condone the establishment of the new centralized government. Put into effect in the spring of 1789, the states lost a great deal of power overnight. But to many, it had to be done, or else the nation would cease to be functional. To quell the fears of many, the economic and political elites who drew up the Constitution made sure that the government, although centralized, was subject to a system of checks and balances to stop any part of the government from gaining too much power. But it was not until the Bill of Rights amended the Constitution that ratification of the document took place. The United States now had a centralized federal government that could help ensure the nation's survival economically, politically, socially, and even internationally. The United States underwent a great deal of growing pains in the years following the ratification of the Constitution. There would be consistent debate about the size of the federal government and what its powers should be, especially where the Constitution was less than clear about those issues. As the importance of the United States, its economy, and its territory grew in the 19th century, there were efforts to clarify the role of the government and to expand it. Even someone like Thomas Jefferson played a role in the expanded powers of the federal government, especially after the Louisiana Purchase and the need to administer the laws and the policies of the nation in these new areas. An apparatus of the government, the United States military expanded as the country expanded territorially, creating even more issues, including what powers the military had, how to fund it, and if there should be a standing army at all, given the concerns Americans went through with the British and the trampling of civil liberties. There also were also issues regarding the application of the rights bestowed on American citizens via the Constitution, and who actually was considered a citizen deserving of those rights. And finally, there were discussions about the nation's place in the world and how involved it should be in the international system. The core of many of these issues are still with American citizens and the nation today, but the almost 250-year continuation of these debates are an illustration of just how successful the American Revolution truly was. The great experiment of democracy stands out as a major human achievement, one that originated from a bold rebellion and revolution. The experiment has not only endured but thrived, adapting to changing times and expanding its inclusive reach, even if it has hit some major bumps in the road in the modern day. The resilience and adaptability of American democracy are testaments to the idea of a nation governed by the people, for the people. The initial principles and ideals of this democratic experiment has been tested over the century, but the American Revolution can be regarded as one of the greatest successes in the history of world revolutions. It not only secured independence from colonial rule, but also established a precedent for democratic governance that has inspired many other nations, and the principles of liberty, equality, and justice that were championed during the revolution continue to resonate today throughout the globe. The ongoing vitality of these ideals underscores the profound and lasting impact of the American Revolution, even if the nation is still trying to get it right for all.